Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's episode of Hall of Fame, a podcast by FemFort. My name is Samantha, your host, and with me today I have a special guest, as usual. So I will let her introduce herself in a little bit. This month's episode, we want to talk about something new and exciting that we are launching, which, for those of you who haven't seen, is the Virtual Museum of African Feminist Icons. And again, the guest we have with us today is one of the many brilliant women that are featured in the museum. We are launching on March 7th this year, ahead of International Women's Day, and it is a tribute or a FemFort offering. A tribute to women who in many ways have and continue to pave way for gender justice and a more equitable society. So we are excited to get into some of the conversations around African feminist icons and the work that they do or have been doing or continue to do. So I will let my guest introduce herself and we can get started.
Hello, everyone. My name is Safina Virani. I am a radical learning feminist, an award winning women's rights activist, and I am currently the co director of Frown Initiative Uganda. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So I want to start with something simple. I hope it's simple. We just have a conversation around your personal feminist journey. I think one of the very first episodes we did was about when did you learn or when did you start identifying as a feminist? So it's a question that I like to go back to. So I guess let's start there. Yeah.
When did I learn I was a feminist? I've always been, someone that advocates for women's rights and women's equality. And I was always like that kid that was different at home, like with my cousins and everything. So I didn't know what feminism was at that time. But I was always like, why don't you treat me the same as you treat, like my male cousins?
Yeah.
So that's when I started. And growing up, my dad also was very heavy on, you have to be independent because we're only girls in the family.
Okay.
So you have to be independent, you have to look after yourself, you have to rely on yourself. So we could say that he sort of also like helped set the
Shape the
foundation.
narrative,
Yeah. And as I got older, I actually wasn't sure what I wanted to do, what I wanted to become. So I was more into like refugee rights and, immigration issues. And it wasn't until I went to uni that I started taking like gender classes and interacting with other people that I learned the definition of what feminism is. Like, this is what I've always wanted to do, and this is where I feel like my calling is, and it sort of put a name to it that I could now follow and say, okay, so this whole time, what I've been trying to do is feminist work. And with that, I built on, like my academia on feminism. Like I started to read feminist literature, and I still do. It's a learning process. That's
Yeah.
why even when I introduce myself, I say I'm a radical learning feminist,
Yeah.
because it's not something that you learn one time and you're like, okay, I have it figured out. It's a journey. The feminist that I was maybe last year or the year before is not the feminist that I am today.
Okay.
So
that actually sets me up for the question that I wanted to ask next. So a lot of feminists, I think those that I've actually interacted with, always introduce themselves with learning feminist or, like you said, radical learning. And I've wanted to ask this question, so you are my first victim. Just around how you think your feminism has changed, if I can put it like that, from, I wouldn't say a moment, because like you've explained, there's like a series of events, but like from the time you like put a definition or attached meaning to the word feminism, and I would say today, Like, how has that evolved? Or, yeah.
Well, in uni is when I attached the word feminism, and back then I just started reading, feminist literature. So I started very easy, very simple. So I was like one of those feminists that would say, "Oh, I'm looking for equality," and I didn't really understand the structures. I didn't look at women's issues as a structural thing in society. I always thought you just address one problem and it works out. I never really understood that everything is a structure. Like, it's built to work this way, and we have to tear it down. So back then I was one of those young feminists that's like, oh, not all men, or I just want equality.
Yeah.
So now I'm much different. I don't believe that we can be equal. I don't believe in equality. I believe in justice. I believe in equal opportunities. But then even the issue of equal opportunities is it doesn't account for the different hurdles that women face in society. So we can say, oh, everyone should have access to education. But then if we're not addressing issues like why girls tend to, be held back, because, sometimes girls spend, I think it was research that shows women and girls spend about 100 hours a year fetching water. And this is like hours that they could have spent studying, girls are married off at a very young age, or they're told from like a very young age that, just marry a rich husband and you'll be set for life. So even if we do put on the table that we're giving everyone equal opportunity, but we're not addressing the different hurdles in people's lives, we're not looking at it from an intersectionality, then is it really an equal opportunity? Like, we're opening school, like we can say, oh, school is open for everyone. And that's what Uganda does. It says school is open for everyone. Everyone can go to school. But it doesn't address the reason as to why girls are held back. The culture, the unpaid care work that girls start doing at a very young age. So until we address these systematic issues, until we address it as a system, even if we do say we're giving everyone equal education, it's not going to work, because you'll find girls end up dropping out of school, or they don't come to school at all, or they're falling behind in school because they don't have time to go study, homework and all of that. So yeah, I'm more now. Back then I was equal everything, but now it's more of justice. I want gender justice and women's liberation. So my feminism now is heavy on women's liberation.
So it kind of feels silly now to ask you because my next question was around specific issues or causes that you're passionate about, but I think the previous answer sort of touches on that. But I wanted to specific, because we were having a conversation before and I was telling you the museum and the way it's set up, or the way it documents. Right now we have documented African feminists and the work they do, but hopefully the dream for the future is for it to evolve to actually document outside of biographies, to also document alternative feminist knowledges that center on African art, African realities, and African experiences, and things like that. So it's important that we talk more in depth about, the specific issues or the specific causes that you are passionate about, or that are taking up your time, if I can put it like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'm specifically focused on sexual and gender-based violence. And if you want to go deep into it, I focus strictly on sexual violence. I mean, I do engage in other feminist issues and I do have conversations about it, but my focus right now is addressing sexual violence. And with my background in, international relations and peace and conflict, I want to address, like, something that I'm now building up on is addressing rape as a weapon of war. So rape used in conflict, and the victims, how are they treated in these societies? Do they get access to help? So right now, like I mentioned in the beginning, I'm a co-director of Frown Initiative Uganda, and actually one of the founders. And what we do at Frown is we offer free medical, legal, and psychological assistance. So the medical is in terms of emergency medication, like, the morning after pill, PEP, in some cases PrEP, HIV testing, STD testing. Then we have psychological assistance. We do have trauma psychologists that work with victims of sexual violence, and we also offer legal services. So, in case you want to take the case further up, with the police and to court, we do have a section for that. And we're looking at expanding. Of course, we want to work outside of Kampala. We've actually started working in 5 districts outside of Kampala.
Oh, nice.
Yes, and we hope to, be countrywide. And Uganda being a country that hosts a very huge number of refugees. I think the top 3 countries in the world that host refugees. One day we're looking at maybe offering these services in refugee camps, because there are a lot of victims of rape that have fled, rape during conflict, and they're in the camps, and not many of them have access to psychological help. This is something that I witnessed when I was working in refugee camps at a much younger age. And yeah, it's also what has inspired me to. I sort of want to create that. I want to fix the gap in between refugee integration in Uganda, and then also them getting psychological assistance for sexual violence that they faced. So it's something that I'm very interested in right now.
Okay. So maybe a shameless plug. So as you were mentioning about talking about your experience working in refugee camps, so we have done some work around that as well, and I think one of our projects touches MVP and Rhino Camp. And so, like you were mentioning earlier, like some of the conversations we are having, if you're just saying that girls and women should go to school without actually addressing the intersectionalities that are, hindering that access to school, then, that doesn't make sense. And I think that's much clearer with the work when we are working with them. It's like, all these districts that we have, if I give an example of, I'm going to say Madiokolo and Terego, I think they're the ones that share those camps. You have the girls that are in the community, but not exactly the girls that are in the district itself, and then the girls that are in the refugee community. So then when you're designing the program, if it's very easy to overlook and just say, okay, so this is, you bundle them together and say this is their problem, and yet there's something like what you were saying, there's an extra layer of something, like they're in the same community, but then the hurdles that they're facing are not exactly the same. Yeah, so I thought that was and something that we had in common. And now I want to talk about, I think you've briefly talked, or maybe not, the unique challenges, or I hate the word challenges, or opportunities to explore when it comes to the field that Frawen is, working in, and then also your personal work on the side, because I'd like to believe there's that as well. But before you answer that, I wanted to ask, again, I'd briefly touched on this. I've been following, the work that you've been doing with the evacuations of the African women stranded in Lebanon on your X platform. So, I thought you'd tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So should I start with that? Or?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm an advocate for Palestinian liberation, and as we all know, the situation that's happening right now is that there's a genocide happening, and it was sort of spreading now to Lebanon, and it was honestly me evacuating African women stranded in Lebanon was a sort of out of the blue kind of thing. I didn't plan for it. But when Israel started to bomb Lebanon, of course, everyone was like, oh my goodness, there are a lot of Lebanese families that are homeless, and, some have been killed, they've lost their homes. And I saw a video after like a few weeks that was talking about how many African women have been stranded because their employers fled the country. And if everyone knows the system of how Africans are taken to the Middle East, it's more of like I want to say trafficking, because they're taken from here to there, and the passports are confiscated as soon as they get there. They don't really have legal protection as sort of like legal workers. Even if they have entered the country legally, they're not protected. They live in a system that exploits them and that abuses them and has zero regard for their life. So when the video came out, I was like, oh my goodness, because even with me, I completely forgot about the African migrants that live in Lebanon. Like, it was not something that occurred to me when the bombing was announced. So when I saw the video, I was like, oh my goodness, no one's talking about this. They're sort of like a forgotten population in the shadows. So I started to talk about it. And with my huge following, of course, it got traction and everyone was like, talking about it. And then the issue came when I was accused of being a CIA asset. I was accused of being a CIA agent trying to sow division in the movement, which is not something that I was actually doing. I was just bringing attention to the fact that, African women were being abandoned in the street, because some of them were left on the street, like their employers would drive them to the street, and there was like a beach where they would like leave them and say, find your sisters. That's what they were telling them, find your sisters. And they meant by sisters, they meant like other African women, and you guys sort yourselves out. And then they would also, some of them were locked inside the houses. So the employers would flee the house, and then they would say, stay inside and look after the house, because they're not sure if it'll be bombed or if it will stay there and someone might come and steal stuff. So they'll like stay in here and look after the house. Some of them, their passports, like actually all of them didn't have passports. I think only like 3 or 4 had passports. But everyone, their passports were confiscated by the employers, because they would say, I'm not going to let you go back to your country until you pay me back the amount of money that I used to bring you. Okay. So they call themselves sponsors, and they say, I won't let you go back until you work enough to refund the money that I spent on you. So that's why I call it trafficking. So that was the situation, and bringing attention to this did not go well with people online. Nonetheless, I said, instead of talking about it, why don't I do something about it? So I reached out to some organizations that already work with migrants in Lebanon, and I asked them, like, is there anything that we can help? Because I have a huge following. I could like share your donation links and stuff like that, so that you can help provide emergency housing to these women. Because another issue was the women that were left on the street were collected by a group of people and taken to a shelter. This shelter was set up by the Lebanese government, and they were kicked out the next day, because we thought like, okay, they've been taken to the shelter, so it's fine, everything is okay. But then the next day they were told to leave. So they were not allowed entrance to the shelter. And if you look it up, there was a statement released by, I think it was the Ministry of Education in Lebanon, that was saying, don't allow foreigners into the shelters. Yeah. So, they were back on the street. The bombing was intense. So the question is like, now what do we do? And some of the organizations that I reached out to were not doing evacuations, and they were not housing anyone. They were not providing like shelter. So I was like, you know what? I'll take it up upon myself to do it. I'll do it myself. So there was a Twitter account that posted a video of a Sierra Leonean woman, and she was, crying, and she was begging the government to evacuate or, to provide shelter, because they were staying about 45 women in one small apartment. Like, I wouldn't even call it an apartment. It was just like one room with a toilet and a bathroom. And there was like 45 women in there. So they were living body to body. Like, even how they would sleep, they would not be able to like all lay down. So they would like sleep in shifts. So some people would sit, others would lay down. It was terrible. It was a terrible condition. And I asked them, like, what do you need right now? So that we need money for rent, we need money for food. A lot of these women barely make $1 a day when they're working. They at most can make $100 in a month. And these women, I remember sending money back home because that's the reason that they end up in those situations, because they're trying to look after their families here. So a lot of times you find they've already sent them in that no one honestly expected that to happen, like the bombing. It was very out of the blue. So they didn't have any money on them, and they needed money for rent, they needed money for food. Some of them were injured from the bombings. Others had already chronic illnesses, so there was need for a lot of stuff. Some of them didn't even have clothes. They only had like 3 mattresses in that room, so the situation was very, very bad. So I reached out to a few friends that I have on social media, because in Uganda you're not allowed to open a GoFundMe. So I reached out to a friend of mine that is based in Canada, and I was like, hey, listen, mind you, these are people that we only interact with on the timeline. I don't know them in like real life. So I reached out. I was like, hey, listen, so this is the situation, and I'm thinking we could raise money and send it over to them so that they can pay for rent and maybe get another apartment that's much bigger. Because the fact that there were so many in a small apartment was also a very big issue for the landlord. He's like, so many people are going to make it dirty or whatever his excuses were. So they needed to move out of that place. So what we did is she opened the GoFundMe, and that's how it started. So she started to raise money. And in the meantime, I was also communicating with Dea. She's from Lebanon. She's in Lebanon right now. And she was working with the women that were left on the street. So the women that I was helping were already in apartments, like in one apartment. And Dea was working on the women that were left on the street. So she got them, and she got a warehouse, sort of like, it looks like an abandoned building. And she built a shelter for them from scratch.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Like it was an empty just walls, and it's not even like painted walls or anything. It's cemented floors, and it looked like it was a construction site that sort of just like got left there. Okay. So she built the shelter from scratch. She paid, I guess, the owners of the place, and then she took in about 100 women at once. And just like me, she was relying on donations. She was like, please donate. And so people started to bring in mattresses and clothes and food. She had restaurants bringing in food. And GoFundMe takes about like a week to clear funding. So even if we were getting donations immediately, it took a week for them to give us the money. So what we did now was we were relying on the goodwill of some Lebanese restaurants and some Lebanese families who would deliver food. They would bring food, cooked food, and then deliver it. And then I reached out to Dea, and she's like, okay, yeah, we can work together, and I can help your team that you're helping on the other side. So she would provide for the shelter, and then she would deliver food and basic necessities to the women that I was helping. And over the course of the months, we, of course, separated them. We got them in different houses. We reduced the numbers from 40 to 20, then to 8, so that they were more comfortable in their living situation. And then we started working on evacuation. Honestly, she did most of the work. So so she did most. I just did coordinating with my team that was there and raising the money for them to, because she went to the general security because they needed paperwork. They didn't have passports. So she needed to work on travel documents, and then getting them cleared by immigration, and then flight tickets and everything. So she did all of that on the ground. I was just coordinating with my team to let them know that, okay, so send me this information, and I send it to her. Or like if they had an emergency, I would contact there and tell her, can you please send this much money to them, or can you send food today, things like that. Yeah, so she did most of the groundwork, reaching out to get travel documents, to get clearance, the flight tickets. And so slowly we did the first evacuation, which was a plane that was actually chartered by IOM. So it took the biggest group of people. There were over 100. I think there were 110 that went in the first. This was in November. And then we just worked on the remainder that were in the shelter, and those that were part of my team that I was looking after that wanted to also be evacuated. So that was another group of 40 people that went. They went in sections, because first it was 8 people got cleared in the first weeks of December. So they went first, and then we had the remainder go early Jan.
Okay.
So yeah.
Wow. So the reason why this conversation, like why I prompted you to give us more details about that, is because we had a conversation, I think, with Lydia Namubiru, and we talked about how feminism has evolved in the digital age. And I thought this was like the perfect example of what it looks like building communities of care online, because it's one thing to just say like, oh, this is the opportunity that is available, but I think sometimes people like
They
just
don't
need,
actively, yeah.
so I thought this was just like it helped illustrate that, you don't have to I
To
don't
be
know,
there.
be at an embassy and, have the authority to sign passports or something like that. But just with a Twitter account, and, connections here and there, you are able to actually do work that is quite impactful in the way that you've done. So thank you for sharing that with us. So one thing I wanted to ask is how, speaking in regard to the museum now and all these African women that have been or will be profiled in the museum, I just wanted to ask how being African shapes your approach to feminism and feminist activism. Yeah.
Well, I was born and I grew up here, raised in an African household with my very African mom that is not, I wouldn't call her a feminist because she was also raised in a system that, our parents tend to raise us with what they learned. So it was a very tough system. She raised us to like kneel down and do stuff like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
And how it shaped the person that I am is just from seeing these things or from experiencing them firsthand. Um, I don't think I would have the same mindset I do right now if I grew up in a Western country.
Yeah.
Like growing up here, I've seen like my cousins that I studied with or those that I was 1 year ahead of now have like two kids. And, they got married really young because that's just how the system is. After high school, they were not given the opportunity to continue and do, uni. So they're told, oh, just get married and everything will be fine. And now like one of them has like two kids and the husband is marrying a second wife. So having to see these things happen firsthand has definitely shaped the way I respond to women's activism. It's also given me the ability to, I guess, critically think about the structures that we have that set us up in this situation, because then we have like the history of colonialism that has changed how women are perceived, that has changed how minority groups are perceived in different African countries. If you look at our history of how we respected minorities back then, pre-colonialism, and how we treat people now, it's like day and light. So growing up in Africa has definitely shaped how it's based off my experiences and what I've seen has made me the feminist that I am today. Because now I look at everything from a coming up from a developing country perspective. When you go out there, some of the things, how Western feminists approach things and how we approach things is very different. And that's okay because this is based off their experience growing up in a developed country. So, they'll have access to certain things that we don't have access to. So, when you have conversations about like FGM or access to education, just the basics, for them, it's sort of like, isn't that a normal thing? Doesn't everyone go to school kind of thing? But for us, it's different. We have to talk about, girls going to fetch water. For them, it's, just open a tap. Like the time that we spend on these things, not the same thing over there. But of course, there are issues that remain the same, that we do live in a patriarchal society. It's just the severity of it is different. So I guess that also what made me more of like a radical feminist, because I don't have I don't want to say privilege, but I don't have the space to be liberal, to take time with these things. Because for us here in Africa, it's very different. We don't have a lot of time. with, developing. So,
Yeah, so you spoke on something that, the way like different experiences shape what people's feminism looks like, and even like taking it away from the Western world, even just within the Ugandan context, the privileges or, will be quite different. So you'll again sit in an office and say, okay, so this is the program and this is what we want to address, and then meanwhile that the people you're talking about, like, that is like the list of their problems. And so it's just like something that I try and pay attention to, and I'm just like, okay, so we are having this conversation about how do we help a girl in West Nile, and then we are having it as Safina and Samantha, and then we've never been to West Nile. We've not bothered to ask any of the community leaders, like, what's the immediate point of the immediate pain point, like, what's their experience, and then we're just drafting programs of that. So I'm happy you pointed to that.
So if I could just add on that, so something that we try to do at Frauen is we try to collaborate with people in these different districts. So we did have an outreach in West Nile, and what we were addressing was period poverty. And now people say, oh, period poverty, how is that in your mandate as an organization that works with sexual violence? And people tend to overlook that a lot of times girls are forced into situations because they need to afford certain things.
To afford pads, yes.
So like we had like a whole documentary in Uganda that was Sex for Pads, and it sort of shed light onto this and how these different issues intersect. So of course, if you go to West Nile as Frauen and you say we're offering psychological assistance, they will look at you like that's not our immediate problem. We need access to sanitary towels. We need access to healthcare. So that's how we sort of try to see as an organization, how do these issues intersect with what we're trying to solve? So that's how we come up with these programs that target different regions based off what they need and what we can provide, because you can't provide everything. And we like to use people in those regions. So even for our HIV program that's running right now, we got people that are already set up in the different districts, that have already done the work in the districts. We brought them to Kampala. We laid out the idea, we laid out the project, and we told them this is what we want to do. And so now it's working, and it's working with people from that district who just now come back and report to us and tell us, so this is how it's going. This is how we could modify the program for this specific district. So we try to get people in the districts to do the work.
Okay. Yeah, that actually has worked for FemFort as well, because we are in West Nile as well with a bunch of with a couple of other districts. And so we actually did find that working with the community leaders, and we are mostly in schools, so but that works for us still, because then we're able to use the peer educators themselves. So we often have like manuals designed per project, and then so you have like an orientation where you go through, okay, so this is what we have, and then maybe you co-design with the teachers themselves or the community leaders, and then you end up with a product that actually addresses what their concerns are, as opposed to what you think they are. Because a lot of times, the privilege catches you unaware. You're just not even thinking that, because, you already have this as an everyday thing. So definitely that helps as well. So I think let's talk about flesh out the museum a little bit. We already talked about, African, how growing up as an African has shaped your feminism. I have to ask you what other African feminists you either look up to individually, or, the work that they're doing around the movement.
Yes.
Also, I'm trying to see if we've already profiled some of them for the museum. So,
that's I find that like out of every question I've asked, that's probably a very hard question for me, because I don't specifically have like people that I look up to.
That's okay.
as a
That's why I said
person.
and work. Like maybe there's
Yeah.
just like this specific campaign or thing or something around African feminism that speaks to you. Doesn't necessarily have to be like, oh, it inspired me to move from point A to point B, but maybe something that speaks to you. Yeah.
Okay, so I don't have like someone that I look up to because I think different people have different journeys. And sometimes when you look up to someone, you want to be like them, and what you have and what they have is not the same.
Yeah.
So the opportunities and challenges they face are not the same that you have. So I don't have someone that I look up to. I'm just trying to, you know, learn as I go.
Yeah.
But they are definitely African feminists that have made me the person that I am today. So, for example, reading Sylvia Tamile's work has made me the person that has sort of contributed to me learning what feminism looks like in Africa.
Yeah.
Then, honestly, the feminists that have made me who I am today to sit on this chair and have these conversations is the feminists in my life that, much older feminists that have sort of, every time I have a question, I go to them, I ask them for help, in case I have challenges. And these are feminists that I've never met in real life. They're not in Uganda,
Okay.
but they're all across Africa, and they have done work on sexual and reproductive health. They've done a lot of feminist organizing. So we just found each other, like you said, on the internet, having digital spaces. So we just found each other on Twitter. And since they were much older than me, sometimes when I'd share that I'm having a challenge, they would reach out to me in my DM and say, oh, this and this, or I faced the same challenge when I was starting an organization, and this is how I resolved it, or this is how I went about it. And they're the ones that have really shaped who I am right now, because they're the ones, because usually when we look at famous feminists, it's so hard to reach out to them and ask for their help, if we're being completely honest.
That's true.
You read their work or you read about like social media posts that they post, and that's it. That's as much access as you're gonna get to them. So for me, really, it's been the feminists that have helped me with my journey on a day-to-day basis. Those are the ones that every time I have an issue, I can go ask them, and they'll always have an answer. Or if they don't have an answer, then we can brainstorm together.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, for me, it's those women. I wish I could list them all, but I'll send them this podcast and say, I was talking about you here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So building on that, there's the idea that, or the dream that FemFort has for the museum, but then speaking in terms of how will it translate, or how was it translated to you? So I just wanted us to talk briefly about what the museum represents. Because like I already said, now it's, biographies of these amazing women and the work they've done, but hopefully it will be able to, evolve into a data bank of all kinds of feminist knowledge and lived realities and experiences. So just kind of what that represents for you, or what that means to you, if I can put it like that, as someone that's featured in the museum. Yeah.
Well, I think, doing biography seems like it seems so formal. I would think if they're like day-to-day issues that these feminists have faced that they could share, then that would be really, really nice. Because with biographies, it's like properly curated to only show like your achievements, or, she's done this, she's done that. But it doesn't really tell you the struggles that this person has gone through to get to that position. So, you sort of, that's the thing, you idolize these people, and you fail to see them as a person that can make mistakes. And that's something I definitely don't want to happen to me. So if you're like watching this, I am a person that makes mistakes. Please don't idolize me. I'm in the museum, but don't idolize me. And that's something that really scares me, is when people put you on websites, or when they put you on these kinds of things, and they only put, the achievements that you've had. And of course, everyone wants to look at achievements. But I think for younger feminists, or for people that are just starting their feminist journey, that don't know how to start, or that, face something on day one, they face an issue and they face backlash and they're like, okay, I'm gonna quit right now.
Yeah.
It would be nice for them. I'm speaking from what I wished I had. It would be nice to have, the challenges that these feminists that we idolize, the challenges that they faced to get to where they are, the backlash that they face. We never talk. This is honestly something I didn't think happened. I don't know. Maybe I lived in a bubble. But the first time I got like serious backlash for being a feminist, I was so like, what is going on?
Yeah.
I was like, what is happening? Like, what is this?
Yeah.
So to have challenges that they have faced to become the people that they are now, I think would be really amazing. Because even a lot of times when you read their I personally don't read biographies. But a lot of times when you get the gist of a biography, it's all, I did this, I did that. I'm so amazing. I want to know what it took for you to get there, how you got there, how did you address. And that's why I said, for me, the feminists that have created a huge impact in my life are the feminists I speak to almost every day.
Yeah.
Because when I have an issue, it's easy for me to reach out to them and tell them how, when you were doing this, how did you go about it? So I think the museum should have biographies, but I think it should also share like struggles, or like have spaces where maybe like a comment board that I'm not sure. I'm not a graphics designer or whatever.
Yeah.
But a sort of like board where people can like post like, oh, this is an issue that I'm facing right now as a feminist, how did you go about it? And then other feminists could respond and say, oh, I faced this issue as well, and this is what I did. Something like that. Sort of like, I think the Flow app has this, but that's more of like period issues, like where people just go and they say, I'm facing this issue. How can I go about it? Or how should I solve it? And just create a conversation from there. I think that would be really nice.
Okay, that's actually something to definitely think about. Okay, so maybe calling them biographies was not the right word. So again, I think the version that you've seen is just like, I don't want to call it a prototype because it feels like, oh, we are just in the beginning stages. But like I said, what it is now is publicly available information about these women. And so it goes beyond, oh, she grew up here and then now she's doing this and blah, blah, blah. There's women, for example, if I say the icons that are profiled under academia, we do have, their books. If I'm to use Professor Sylvia Tamale's example, we do have like a link where someone can just go and buy or borrow her book on decolonizing feminism. So it's just more than, oh, this is what she's doing now, these are her causes. And also I need to add the fact that we are hoping, especially with the launch, that, it will just go beyond the women that we see every day, because that's also something very important, that people did not learn feminism or did not want to be feminists outside of having conversations with popular feminists, if I can put it like that. It's like you've said, the women in their lives, the feminists in their lives. So hopefully we will do it justice and include, the voices that would normally be left out. And we hope to our listeners or viewers or whatever, that, people will help us to build this platform. And so part of the work that we are doing in the background is reaching out to the feminist collectives in different countries, those that we can find anyway. So then they can, we can create like a chain of, or if I reach out to feminists in Tanzania, then maybe someone has a contact to feminists and something like that. And then because it's important that, we don't tell people's stories for them.
Yeah.
But if we reach out to the collective that is feminists in Tanzania, then they can say, okay, so these are the women in our collective and this is what they have to say about their stories, without her saying, so Safina works in Tanzania and this is what she's doing there, and something like that. So it's quite a huge dream, but hopefully with a collective and, with the rest of the movement, we can manage to build it bigger and better. But definitely the point you made about having like a board, I just wrote down, like read it, like my
Okay, yeah,
notes.
that's one way
I
to
think,
put it.
yeah, that like that's so cool because I think about all the times when I've had like you have like something and then there's just no relevant information. You'll always
Yeah.
find the answer on Reddit. Always.
Yeah.
So that's why I said like Reddit. So that's so cool. That's definitely something that we'll look into because yeah, we definitely need to have that community and find a way to have these conversations. So that I had a question around what you hope visitors will take away from the museum, but I think what you've given kind of suffices because if they're coming to the museum seeing all these people, maybe they comment on the board also, this person is not featured and they're doing this work in my community, that would be great. Or if they say I have this problem, so that would be great. I think that's a great takeaway, unless you have something to add to that because I don't want to
misrepresent me.
to misrepresent you. Yeah. So I think that would be a good takeaway, unless you have something to add to that.
I think what's really important is that they get inspired or feel inspired by like the work that women have done, the women before them, and the women now, so that they can also contribute to the future. Because like when I was developing my feminism, I was mostly motivated because like there's a lot of pushback when you're doing this kind of work. And what motivated me to do it is I would always remember like the feminists that I've read about in the past that did all this work. They're women that literally died for us to get an education. So every time I feel like I want to give up or oh my goodness, I should just like switch over to business or become study business administration or something.
Yeah.
It's I remind myself that there are women that tried so hard to get us to where we are today. And we can only do their memory justice by making the future better for the girls that are going to be born then, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think an important takeaway would be, I hope you get inspired so that you can also create a world that's better for the future generations to come. Because the women back then were also building, a lot of them didn't get to experience the world that they worked for.
Yeah.
We're the ones who are now enjoying what they fought for. So now it's our turn to fight for the future generations until we can see gender justice and liberation for women.
Yeah. So my next question is about, you see, that like when you're online and then someone just randomly quotes like a feminist's thing and then they say, oh, so I just googled feminism and I found feminism is, and then they type like a that thing, and then so that, and then also the like people are always saying, oh, like feminists never just respond, they just say, oh, read blah blah blah. So that's best off on that. My next question. Yeah. So what feminist literature or what books, I don't want to limit it to that, what books are you reading at that time, or have you read that influence or speak to the work you do? Or if someone is looking for, if they tell someone online read, where do they start? Or where, like, what books? Yeah.
So there's a lot of feminist literature out there.
Yeah.
Like there's books and research and people that just Google what feminism is and then they put for you the first thing that
that comes up.
Wikipedia is, it's a start. I mean, it's a start.
True.
If you're learning what feminism is about, it's a start, but you have to be able to look over that. Like, okay, you've got the basic definition,
Then
but
what?
feminism means a lot of things to different people. Like I say, there are different types of feminists. There's liberal feminists, there's radical feminists. Then we have the not so much like choice feminists that we do hope will one day switch over from that and grow past being a choice feminist. And they all have different meanings to their feminism. Like if you ask some people, what does feminism mean to you? For them, it means equality. For me, it means liberation. It means justice. So the books that I have read, of course, on African feminism, there's the one and only Sylvia Tamale. I mean, she's like, a lot of times people say, oh, Afrofeminism. I like to credit it to her, actually, because she's the one that was willing to venture out and write on something like that. Of
Yeah.
course, there are much more authors and smaller authors that have done work, but I think she's a very prominent figure when we look at African feminism. The feminism that when I started to read books, like books on feminism, I read a lot of Andrea Dworkin. She was a radical American feminist, and the reason as to why her work spoke a lot to me was because she focused on sexual and gender-based violence. So in a lot of her work, she addresses the systems of sexual and gender-based violence, and this is something that I work on, this is something that I'm interested in. So a lot of her work just sort of like made sense to me. So she's someone that I learned like when I was starting off in uni, and also I had a lot of access to like the university I studied in gave me access to her books and her research. So she was like the basis, like strong foundation was built of her. So when it comes to doing research on feminism, I guess you need to start with what does feminism mean to you, and then find feminists that have done work around what you're interested in, and then build from there. Because even like I read also a lot of Nigerian books by Nigerian women authors, and they're not specifically like feminist literature, but they address a lot of issues that we face it's mostly based in Nigeria, but these issues cut across the African continent. So you read a lot of their books and how they address like it follows like a story of a girl that had to get married at a young age, or that was pulled out of school or something like that, and it just tells the story of how her life sort of unfolded in front of her and how she grew up and how her life continued. And when you read this work, you relate it to what happens in Uganda as well, and it's sort of like, okay, this is an issue that we need to address. It gives you, because this is not your lived experience, so you get to live this experience through these novels, and they sort of like raise questions for you, like, oh, I've always overseen all this, like I never actually recognized this, but now that I've read this book and I've read it based off someone else's experience, it sort of like builds like your conscious, like your class conscious, like, okay, this is something that I've never considered, but now, let me think about that.
That's true. So yeah, in addition to that, guys, please visit the museum. Because again, like I said, we'll have a bunch of resources from the books written by the women profiled on there, journal articles, newspaper articles, YouTube interviews and things like that. So also it's to recognize that feminist literature doesn't look like just the one thing, like just the textbook. Like there's so many ways in which for a lot of people, it's really boring. So for a lot of people, I think one thing that we need to point out, there's poetry, there's poetry, which I recently just learned about that's a thing, but there's a bunch of ways in which African feminist literature has been documented or is being archived. So what we find, we will share online. So just please continue to check out the museum and, the women profiled on there. As we, I think, wrap up, I have a question which is sort of like a call to action for hopefully the aspiring feminist or the learning feminist that is watching us. What's one small or impactful action that our listeners or our viewers can take to contribute to the causes that we've talked about here, or to the feminist movement itself? In short, where does one start?
I don't want to sound like the Nike logo, but
just do it.
Just do it. No, because I'm not even joking.
That's good.
No, I'm not even joking. Because a lot of times you have people that come to you with ideas and they're like, oh, I wanted to do this, but I'm scared.
Yeah.
So it's a quote that I used to have last year on my mirror. It's like, I want to do this, but I'm scared. And then the follow-up is, then do it scared. Like just do it.
Yeah.
And then like if you say just do it and someone is like, but I'm scared. So then you say just do it scared. Because we have so many ideas. We have so much potential.
Yeah.
But people are scared, like, I don't know where to start, or I don't know how to start. Take the first step. Like when we were starting Frauen, I can tell you this, like, we were all in uni.
Oh.
We were all like very young. Some people are still in uni, you know? So, like, no one had ever started an organization or something like that. But we saw a problem and we had a solution. We had a rough idea of what the solution should
Will
look
look
like.
yeah.
And so we're like, let's just start. Because if you keep talking, like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do this, but you never start, you're going to say, I want to do this for the next 10 years.
That's true.
So just do it.
Yeah.
If you want to read that book on feminist literature, but you're not sure if you have the time, just download it on your phone and start with the first page and then the next page. If you have an idea that you want to voice out, voice it out. There's so many people that are willing to support you. Like, you know, there are some people that say, oh, I want to raise money for pads to distribute. Get on your phone and make a poster and just do it.
Yeah.
Like, you might fail the first time, but if you just keep doing it, at some point something's gonna give, you know? So like Finding Nemo, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. So for me, it's just do it. Whatever it is.
Yeah,
just do it. Take the first step and let the world, you know, shape its way around for you. Just take the first step.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there is something to be said to that, because you can't have everything figured out, and if you wait
you'll never be
until
ready.
you'll just never be ready. So start and then let the idea have its own legs. Just figure it out. You are allowed to fail, you are allowed to change your mind and say, okay, so I started here, but maybe maybe this is where I want to go next. So definitely
and like I started with, feminism is a journey. You will never be perfect the first time you do it. You'll make so many mistakes as you go. There are so many things that I remember I said when I was a much younger feminist, and I'm like, oh my goodness, if I met who I was back then, I think we would have a problem with each other. Because I was a very big choice feminist as well. So it's just do it, just start. It's okay to fail. It's okay to make mistakes. You just have to, because how will you know you're going to do good if you don't start, if you don't take the first step? So I would say just start, just do it, whatever it is. If you want to donate. If you want to start your own organization, by all means, go ahead, just do it, and everything will fall into place. And even if it doesn't, you just keep trying until it eventually does.
Okay, I think that is a wrap on our time. Thank you so much for this very interesting conversation. Yes, as thinking whether to call it a conversation, because it felt more of a back and forth, but that's okay. Thank you guys for hanging out with us in the Hall of Fame, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Oh, are we clear? Yay.